right, everybody, here we are. I hope you learn all the words to that. I'll be playing it frequently. It is, of course, the national anthem of a hostile, corrupt, and cruel government, Vladimir Putin's Russia. And it's coming to us, isn't it? Wow. Among the terrible, awful, dangerous, deranged acts this power-mad mobster in the White House wrought against us this week, let's see. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will use AI to search the social media accounts of student visa holders. He's going to be looking for signs of sympathy towards Hamas. Now, Rubio promised to revoke the visas of any supporters of Hamas during confirmation hearings. Of course, now he's using that promise to perfect the technology of surveillance that later Kash Patel and Pam Bondi will use against all of us to shut down dissent. This is what tyrants do. They identify a supposed internal threat, in this case, the students who protested the scale of the war in Gaza. Not exactly a national security threat, to win public support for the creation of policies, technologies, and most importantly, our own permissions that they will later use against the broader public. That's you and me. That's what the CCP does in China. That's what Putin does in Russia. That's North Korea. And it's a threat to all of us. Also this week, our grifter in chief announced that he was ordering the creation of a strategic crypto reserve. What that means is that you and I, our taxpayer dollars, are going to be used to buy cryptocurrencies. This is an outright theft. Theft. Trump is reaching into your pockets and mine to give our money to his crypto buddies. And by the way, that includes his own family. And it isn't just theft, it's also extortion, because Trump's plan isn't limited to Bitcoin, which is what the original plan was, and it is, of course, the best known of those currencies. Nope. Now he wants to take our money to buy a basket of different cryptocurrencies. And that means he gets to decide which currencies, whose blockchain we will be giving our money to. Of course, it means that he decides which outfit to make richer and by extension, which to devalue. So now the crypto bros have to compete to kiss his royal derriere or risk being left behind. Oh, and by the way, there is nothing about this that is buying American. Crypto blockchains are globally decentralized, and the ones he's touting, at least right now, are run by, is an interesting word in the case of crypto, but run by nonprofit foundations, not in the United States, but in Switzerland. But don't let nonprofit fool you. The governance may be nonprofit, but the coin owners are in it for asset appreciation. If Trump were serious about wanting cryptocurrencies to be part of our future, he would regulate the market so that investors would have confidence in those assets. But that's not what a grifter does. And speaking of grift, how are we to understand the on-again, off-again tariff war with our allies and neighbors, Canada and Mexico? The imposition of tariffs, taxes on imports, right, earlier this week clearly had no basis, none. Both countries had fully complied with requests the administration made when it threatened tariffs a month ago. I don't know why you thought that. Was there a policy reason for imposing tariffs? And if there was a policy reason for imposing tariffs on Monday, what happened to that reason by Thursday? I mean, did the world change so much in 3 days that we would go from launching a trade war with our neighbors to, never mind? It makes no sense. Well, unless. When the President of the United States imposes huge trade sanctions on our major trading partners, it sends shivers through the stock market. Prices drop. And when he revokes those sanctions, prices tend to go up. Now, there's no policy reason to explain this on-again, off-again tariff. So people are asking, is this just market manipulation? People are asking. They want to know if insiders are making a killing by what really can only be understood as efforts to make the market go up and down. People are asking that question, and they deserve an answer. I don't know. Is he manipulating the market? Are they making money off of it? Let's find out. This week, we saw Trump double down on that disgusting betrayal of freedom and security we all saw when he and JD ambushed Ukrainian President Zelensky in the Oval Office. Disgusting. And now he's ordered the U.S. government to stop sharing intelligence with Ukraine. Right? Our satellites see Russian troops moving down the road to another village. Sure, let's keep that to ourselves, right? That's the America we're in, folks. Not the one you signed up for. We're on the other side of that war. But our president, he's in with the Russians. Disgusting. And you know what else? I read this morning, Trump says he will no longer let the U.S. military participate with NATO in military exercises in Europe. That's how our militaries learn to work together, right? Why? Because Russia, 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 as he likes to say. Meanwhile, his friend, Mr. Musk, is blowing up his own rockets that apparently don't work, and our government that actually does. Here in Chicago, the Small Business Administration is leaving. They're packing up and leaving in a huff. Why? Because the city refuses to retask our, you know what, somewhat short-staffed police from their regular duties in order to do work with ICE on deportations. For gosh sakes, ICE can do its own work. And the National Weather Service is going dark in places because Musk won't allow funding to replace broken satellite links. And besides, he's too busy firing their staff. Those who depend this spring on tornado alarms, well, good luck. Tell us how that works out when you land in Oz. Then there are the NGOs and nonprofits, the organizations that do a lot of good in the world but act independently from government. Of course, this week, Musk, he and his team dragooned federal marshals and brought them to force their way into the U.S. Africa Development Foundation in order forcibly to oust its leadership and shut it down. What crime did they commit? I don't know. They provided health care in Africa. And then there are the law firms. This week, Trump ordered his government to review the DEI policies of big firms. Wait, what? These are private entities. What does his firm have to do with it? I mean, what does his government have to do with it? And he tried to do the same thing to Georgetown Law School. They said they wouldn't hire any of their graduates unless they un-DEI'd their curriculum. Well, the dean of the law school wrote back and asked if the administration was really trying to stop a Catholic Jesuit school from carrying out its mission. He also pointed out the law was on the school's side and ended by asking for confirmation that the school's graduates would be treated fairly when they applied for government jobs. Naturally, he hasn't heard back. I could go on, and I could go on. The bottom line is that our government is in the hands of a hostile and corrupt power. Every day brings new outrages and lasting damage. It's time to take the streets, folks, to demand our political leaders put an end to this. Later on in this show, I'll tell you about some of the upcoming opportunities you're going to have to do just that. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and the absolutely fabulous Michael Tomasky is joining me when we get back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. I am joined again by Michael Tomasky, the editor-in-chief of The New Republic. As those of you who've heard him here before or have read his work know, he is thoughtful and determined. And his publication, The New Republic, is, not only more important now, but also more accessible online and through social media. So there's really not an excuse not to engage with what's really important content. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Well, I'm like you, like your listeners. We're getting by.
I think we are not just getting by. I think we are getting ready. I think we've had it with this guy. I mean, whatever doom and gloom we had after the election, I think everybody I know, it's been replaced by barely controllable anger.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to believe. A friend of mine said to me, after the first week or so, that we expected a 2,000 volt dose of Trumpism, but we got a 20,000 volt dose. and now it's up to about 40 or 50,000. And I'm angry, and everybody I know is. Unfortunately, everybody in the United States of America is not, but we're getting there.
We are getting there. I mean, I noticed when I go on your website, I mean, I'm sort of shocked to see Fox's Maria Bartiromo staring me in the face. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, she did a reasonably tough interview with Trump last week, I guess. So, we wrote it up. It was newsworthy. It was noteworthy.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of people in the business world are quite anxious about his stewardship of the economy.
Well, they are, and they ought to be, and they should have been last summer and last fall, really. And that's kind of what I wrote about in my last piece that posted Friday. He goes around. I mean, just imagine this. Take Donald Trump out of the picture, and I would ask your listeners just to imagine a presidential candidate whose the chief issue facing America is Americans in that election and every election is economics and the economy and how it's doing for people. And I understand that inflation was a horrible problem for a lot of people. Very painful. And Trump's central promise on the central issue was tariffs. It's my favorite word in the dictionary. I love this word, and so on and so forth. And it just turns out to be his central promise on the central issue. Turns out to be, as most of us knew, just a complete scam. You can't. People kept saying, you can't do this without imposing essentially a tax on the American consumer or on importers. How do you expect this to work? And he just kept plowing on as if he didn't understand this, as if he didn't understand who paid, and maybe he truly doesn't understand who pays. So he announces these things twice, and then within 24 hours, 2 times, he withdraws them. That he should be shamed. Maybe not out of office, but it's just insane.
Well, Michael,
and that's just one of 50 things that we're.
Let's stick with that one for a second. Because I have heard, and I don't want to traffic in gossip, but then again, with these guys, I don't think I care that much. But look, there is no policy reason for tariffs to be it'd be so important that we will wreck our relationship with our 2 closest neighbors and our biggest business allies on Tuesday, and then not do it on Friday. And to do that twice. To me, the only thing I see there is stock market manipulation, and I don't trust these guys not to be doing it for private gain.
Yeah, private gain is always a question. I mean, the corruption, any authoritarian or quasi-fascist, government has a strong element of corruption about it. It's one of the key It's one of the key attributes of an authoritarian regime, and this is no different. And this Bitcoin stuff, which I don't, you shouldn't interview me about this. You should interview somebody who really knows that world. But I know enough to smell a huge scam.
It is a complete scam.
This
I actually
Bitcoin
do
reserve that he's doing.
It's a scam.
Yeah.
So you wrote this piece. I think this is the one you're referencing, which was kind of about Trump and about Elon Musk. And I think you called him an effing idiot. And that was about the nicest thing you had to say. Talk about the cuts and the lies about the cuts.
Well, it's just mind-boggling, and it's possible, Edwin, because it's possible because of something I wrote about right after the election and that you and I spoke about at that time. It's possible because there is a so-called media that is a pro-Trump propaganda network, and it's vast, and it has tremendous reach, and it's not just Fox News. It's other cable news networks. It's Sinclair. It's talk radio. It's all these things that just parrot whatever he says. So if Elon Musk says, I saved us $8 billion, they'll say, $8 billion, look at this. and then it turns out to be 8 million. But they don't care, and they don't correct it, and it's just an abomination. At least I think a critical mass of Americans are learning that the federal government isn't all bad, and that there are people who work in the federal government who are good people, who are dedicated to their jobs, and who are doing important work. So at least there's that, and I think there'll be more of that as the weeks and months go on.
So, I mean, there are two different topics. I want to get to the one about government doing good work in a second. But on the topic of these corrupt, terrible people, did I hear, I don't know, recently that the federal government wants to, of course, now buy $400 million worth of Teslas. Tesla's stock has gone down 50% since the election. You can't get rid of a Tesla now because Americans have had it with these guys.
Right.
And now the government wants to bail them out with a $400 million deal. And these liars backdated the contract to make it look like Biden wanted to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no
bottom, is there?
Yeah. There's no bottom. There's no bottom. There's no end to it. And, there's no accountability as long as the Democrats are in the minority and the Republicans are in the majority, and the Republicans have the cowed posture that they have. And I really don't know what it's going to take. But, it's jaw-dropping every day.
Let me talk about, or ask you about, that you started to talk about the good things that people are doing who work in government. And I want to just zoom out for a minute, because I've been worried so much about this lately. Do you think maybe journalism since Watergate has failed America by moving from, sort of skepticism to something more like, I'm just going to be negatively judgmental about everything our government does and only report the bad stuff because that's, doing what the Watergate guys did, uncovering scandal, that's good for me. And the mainstream press has rarely told the stories about what government does well. And so, it's tornado time here in the Midwest, and we're not going to have tornado alarms because they're undoing the Weather Service.
They rarely have, but I would say this. It's just the nature of the news business to report bad stories, to report conflict, to report failure, to report tension. Yeah. You're not going to see a story in the New York Times that says, everything going swimmingly at Interior. I mean, that's not news. That's, for better or worse, that's how we define news. So the Department of the Interior is only going to make news when somebody screws something up there. When it's functioning well, which is 99% of the time, it just doesn't make the news. That's just kind of the nature of the news business. I put more blame on Democrats and liberal, nonprofits and liberal donors who haven't thought about this question and haven't thought over these last 45 years while government, since Ronald Reagan, has been under constant attack on the right, to defend government. They just do a very poor job of it. They'll defend certain programs that they know are popular, Social Security, Medicare. They'll defend certain programs, but where was President Clinton, President Obama, President Biden, going around to a lake that got cleaned up by the EPA and saying, people can fish and swim in this lake again? That's the government did that. Where's the government saying, this? Where were presidents and Democratic politicians saying, there's a person at the National Cancer Institute who made an important discovery last month, and let's celebrate this person. On an ongoing basis. I wrote my first piece about this 20 years ago, that when John Kerry was running, wishing that, if he became president, he'd do this, highlight effective government work and government workers. Democrats just haven't done that. So, you've had one side for 45 years saying government is the enemy, and you've had the other side not bothering to make the counter argument, and that's part of the problem with where we are.
It's like the FAA, which is being gutted, manages. I think that the data are 45,000 flights daily in America. 45,000 flights. And they manage to keep them safe and figure out what to do, and figure out what to do when the weather changes mid-flight, and all of that. And that is not trivial. That's a really hard thing to do, and we do it well, and we're gutting it just because nobody cares. And I just think across the government we have great examples just like this. And the people, as you said, the people who work in government, they know their jobs. And partly because of civil service, something else we're gutting.
Right.
They know what they're supposed to do, and they're held accountable to do it, and they do a good job.
Yeah. It can be difficult to make your average person focus on something like the FAA because you're asking them to celebrate something that didn't happen. And most people just aren't wired to do that. You know, the FAA has a near perfect record with respect to planes landing safely. FEMA might have prevented a flood somewhere with something they did. But things that didn't happen, this is a difference. But this is a really important point. I wrote about this a couple weeks ago, too. This is a difference between the way the private sector contributes to the economy and the way the public sector contributes to the economy. The private sector, for the most part, there's a lot of corruption and so on, but like the good private sector produces things, makes things, innovates things, invents things, and puts products and convenience in people's hands that are tangible and they can see. The public sector is largely, and not wholly, because the public sector over time has invented and discovered things too, as we know, like DARPA in the Pentagon. But mostly the public sector exists to prevent bad things from happening. So, that stuffed bear that you bought your kid that they didn't choke on because the Consumer Product Safety Commission had the dangerous part removed. Well, they prevented something, and it's not tangible for people, and it's hard for people to see. But those are contributions to the economy too, because what if 0.1% of airline of flights crashed? I mean, that would be a huge number. That would be a couple hundred a day, and nobody would fly.
And no one would fly. They'd all go to ground. No one would get on a plane.
Yeah. Right.
But the government, Michael, also invents the future through the National Science Foundation, NIH, the grants that they give an entire generation of scholars who are now going to sit on the sidelines, I guess as damaging as the Cultural Revolution was in China. But, those labs invent everything because the private sector does not invest. The private sector made a deal with the government 30 years ago. They said, look, we have Bell Labs, we have Xerox PARC, we can do basic research, but it would be more efficient if the government would pay for that. And so the government said, you bet, we will invest in universities to do that work. And now the private sector is like, we don't need you anymore, and we're going to figure this out ourselves. We're already so far ahead with our monopolies that why don't we just forget the future?
And this funding, at universities, these cuts at universities are going to be devastating over time. Again, it's not going to be something that people are going to see dramatically, probably like a big flood or something like that. But it's going to be terrible. The millions and millions of research dollars that are going to be denied, research hospitals affiliated with universities, cancer institutes, other kinds of disease institutes. It's just going to be horrible. And, the United States, has been, Go ahead.
Because of that is a reason why all of the biggest companies in the world were invented here. Because of the research here, and why the most blockbuster drugs in the world that not only save lives but contribute to our economy were invented here. But you know what? Let's pay through the nose for the next blockbuster drug that's invented in China because they're going to make us pay through the nose for it, and it's not going to be invented here. And because the scholars aren't going to be in the labs.
That's right. The scholars aren't going to be in the lab, so it's going to be invented somewhere else, and somebody's going to keep the patent, too. Let's not forget about that. I mean, polio was cured in this country because the genius and, great man who invented the vaccine refused the patent.
Jonas
the great quote. Yeah. I know you know the quote. Patent it. You might as well patent the sun. He could have been a billionaire, and he didn't take a penny. He said, this belongs to the people. This belongs to the world. So that's another way in which our values have shriveled.
Yeah. It's so interesting that the right, the conservative movement, which is different than whatever MAGA is, but the conservative movement spent years saying to those of us on the left, you're ruining everything. You think all values are personal, that there's no such thing as actual real values out there in the world. And it's going to be us who save the idea of values in the world because they've abandoned them in every possible way.
Yeah. There are still, and I do take heart in this, as I know you do, half the country, at least, is against all this. And I think it will be more than half in the near future when people start to really see some of the ramifications of this, particularly when things hit them personally. They're going to fire thousands of people from the Social Security Administration. I mean, they're going to fire 8,000 people from the Veterans Administration.
All veterans, by the way. Those are veterans who work there.
Right.
So let's just talk about disrespect.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. People will feel this, so they'll feel it in a personal way that will change their minds. But there are millions and millions of us who might not feel it personally, to be honest, and don't need to feel it personally to know that it's a bad thing.
The greed and corruption are so on display that, whether it affects you today personally or not, in terms of your own pocketbook, it affects you in terms of just how disgusting it is to watch this display. I mean, I don't live in Ukraine. It doesn't affect me that the United States has changed sides in a war. But that charade's the wrong word. I can't even. It was so disgusting to watch what happened in the Oval Office, right? This sacred space designed by George Washington. The shape of it was George Washington's idea because it was egalitarian. It would celebrate that everybody's the sort of same distance from each other, celebrate equality. That in that sacred place, these two thugs would gang up on that war hero, and he is a war hero, and then switch sides and support Moscow. I don't know, what, and the Republicans are like, oh, whoops, we got to delete our tweets from this morning. We're on a different side now.
Right, exactly. And Marco Rubio, oh my God.
This other thing really bothers me, and this notion that he's now going to go to the tech world and use AI to scrub the social media accounts of every college visa holder in America to see if maybe they were at a protest because the destruction of Gaza was, painful to watch. So they protested, and you're going to say they're pro-Hamas, we're going to strip them of their visas. Like, as bad as that is on its face, this feels to me like using that as an excuse to perfect the technology they're then going to turn on everybody else.
It sure smells that way. I mean, we certainly can put nothing past them. There's every reason to suspect that they have a list. Stephen Miller has a list, and that it's a very long list, and that they'll bide their time and they'll take their time. We're headed to a very dark place in terms of personal liberty. I'm so glad Jeff Bezos wants to defend personal liberty on the Washington Post op-ed page, Edwin.
Yeah, God. disgusting. I mean, I'm so glad that there is the New Republic and there are others out there in journalism still courageous enough to do the job, as opposed to these corporate guys who sort of think, yeah, you know what, this isn't the main thing I want to do in the world, so let me trade journalism for a rocket contract or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are. Thank you for all the kind words you've said about TNR in this segment, but I mean, there are a lot of people out there doing this work, and there are a lot of people who are putting more on the line than I am. So it's going to take all of us.
I think countries are in some. It's not crazy to think of the life of a country a little bit like the life of an individual, and that things happen when we go through dark times, and we come out. We either come out completely broken, or we come out with a different perspective and a little bit stronger. And I don't know, Michael. I actually think there may be a governing majority in America, something we haven't seen either party get their arms around in decades. But there might actually be one if we come out of this differently. If we lean a little bit less aggressively and in your face into the personal freedoms side. That doesn't mean we tell anybody they can't have personal freedom, but we just don't lean into it all the time in the same way. And on the other side, we say we are going to build this democracy. We are going to support voting. We are going to reverse some of the egregious John Roberts decisions that have made our democracy weaker and weaker and weaker. And we may end up with that majority because, this isn't just my neighbors in Chicago who are disgusted by Donald Trump. The people who are still backing him say he's the most awful person they've ever seen. Yeah. But they just don't like us.
I was talking with a never Trump former Republican this past week, whose name you'd know. It was a private conversation, so I don't want to say, but a prominent person who said he thinks that they're in for a massive whooping, the Republicans, in 2026 if this doesn't stop. He thinks that they're just going to get pummeled, and that majority that you're speaking of will begin to emerge.
Yep, I think it's true if we continue to have viable and fair elections. And what I note is that the Brennan Center looked at the data on elections since John Roberts got rid of pre-clearance in the Voting Rights Act, and they've seen a 50% increase in racial disparities in voting, 50% faster disparity in those states where they got rid of pre-clearance than everywhere else. That
wow.
This notion of and I think it was 50%, but 50% faster isn't 50% more. It's a rate, so it's a little confusing.
Yeah.
But still, what we know is that voter suppression is now real. Voter purges are real. That in North Carolina, they're still in court trying to throw 65,000 votes away so that they can control. They can be sure they will have control of the court for the next gerrymander. So we have to really protect the vote, and we have to turn out in enormous numbers to be able to win.
Yeah, we really do. And, you've mentioned the court twice in the last few minutes, and, that's a big problem, and that's a big barrier because, the kind of rulings that they could come up with on voting rights issues, on civil rights issues, on and, of course, on issues of presidential and executive power.
What else can they give him?
Are just terrifying.
What else can they give him? They've given him everything.
The bad guys always think of things that the good guys can't possibly think of.
Well, immunity from everything is a pretty blank check.
Yeah. That's an axiom of politics and an axiom of life. I remember when, what was it? When the Republicans in Pennsylvania, this was a few years ago while Obama was president, Obama was winning, Democrats were winning Pennsylvania and regularly, and they were trying to figure out what to do about this, and they wanted to change their awarding of electoral votes to do it by congressional district. And I thought, well, they can think of stuff that never would have occurred to me. So, who knows what the Supreme Court can do? And maybe, we did see a slight ray of hope from the Supreme Court this past week with Roberts and Coney Barrett voting with the three liberals on the USAID funding question. So maybe, I don't know. I went back and read Coney Barrett's concurrence in the immunity case, and she parted ways from the hard line of Alito and the rest of them. And she said there may be room, there may be room for some kind of prosecution. But
she parted way on the Colorado 14th Amendment case too. She's not. Yeah. She was committed to the pro-life movement, but she's not insane like the rest of these guys.
Yeah. But it takes, it takes people power, and the people power can be stronger than even the Supreme Court. And
I agree
it's going to take a while, but I do think it's going to happen. I think people will begin to see that they have begun to see, but we'll soon feel that this is not the America we're accustomed to.
No, but also like ancient Rome, these emperors are making martyrs. When you think of the people when you think of the Antonin Scalia clerk who refused an order to break the law in order to in order to hang the mayor of New York out by saying, we're not going to prosecute you today. We're just going to leave the noose around your neck. And she refused and didn't just quit quietly, but she lost her job over it. They're going to make martyrs, and that gets people's attention too.
It does, and that will. She was really brave, and that category I think is going to include more and more Republicans in government as time goes on, in the Justice Department, in State Department, in other departments.
Yeah. Michael, what did you think of the way Democrats acted during, after, and around Trump's speech, that sort of Castro-esque, long, rambling thing that he did in front of the joint session of Congress? Yeah, I'm not sure what the right protest is. It's hard to know.
I think the right protest on that occasion would have been mockery. I didn't mind them holding up those little signs, but I thought they should have been funny. I thought they should have made fun of him. I thought they should have belittled him. That would rattle him. That would get under his skin. Stormy Daniels says hi. Things like you owe E. Jean Carroll $70 million or whatever the amount is. Yeah. Things like that. You're headed to
at one point. I agree with you. That's so smart, Michael. Oh my gosh. Yeah, of course they should have done that. I thought during his speech he said, the government went after me, and when you go after like weaponize the government like that, that's no good. And look, where did it get you? And I'm thinking, well, you're up there with all those felons. You're 34 times convicted, buddy.
Yeah. Yes, 34 times convicted. That would have been a good one too. They just, the Democrats don't know. They don't know how to be funny. This is not a very funny time, but humor is an important element of disrobing the emperor.
Yep.
Very important element.
I think that's really smart. Oh my gosh, it's starting to make me laugh thinking about the things he could have done.
Yeah, right.
And did you hear Alyssa Slotkin? And she gave a response that a lot of people thought was no good. I liked it, but I like almost any strong response, no matter where it fits on the spectrum, as long as it's like, we need our democracy back, buddy.
Yeah, I thought it was like good. I thought it was kind of a B+. I didn't have any trouble with it. She's one of the few Democratic success stories from last fall. So that was actually a good idea to trot her out there and give it to her. But again, if the Democrats were a little bit more imaginative and creative, how about a response by a couple of rank-and-file Democrats, working class, probably white, although maybe not, who voted for Trump and who regret their vote? How about them giving the response? I think that would have been more effective.
Yeah, well, we're gonna find plenty of forum for people like that coming up. I think pretty soon. Maybe even the New York Times will go back to their vaunted diners where they hunt for Trump voters who are usually on somebody's payroll, but find some who say, "Oh yeah, well, last time we talked, I was wrong."
Back to Youngstown.
Back to Youngstown. That's a great idea. That would have been fun because it's a very hard forum for the audience. For the Congress, who has to be respectful of the place. We can't tear down the institutions. We need them.
Yeah, and I do. I'm a little bit of I might disappoint some of your listeners in this one regard, but or others, who knows? But I am a little bit of a traditionalist when it comes to those kind of ceremonial things, and I think, I don't think Al Green, did the right thing, and if I had been advising them, I would have said, clap. You don't have to stand and clap, but clap for the kid with cancer, for goodness sakes. Clap for some of these people he introduced at the end. They're Americans. They're not.
Well, whatever you think about Al Green's behavior, what did you think of Democrats joining Republicans to vote censure?
I think if I were in Congress, I wouldn't have voted that way unless I was in a really, R+10 kind of district. I don't know. People have their reasons. I mean, I'm not worked up about that I'm going to write about it or anything. I see that it was 10 of them.
Fair.
It was kind of an interesting little group of 10. It wasn't all like the 10 most moderate by any means. So I don't know. It was, that's something I'm not going to lose sleep over.
Okay, I think that makes sense. My experience, and it's, vastly limited to a couple terms in a city council here in Chicago, is that votes like that often depend on the personal feelings that legislators have for each other.
I think that's right. Yeah. And who knows? Couple of those people may have, had a fight with Al Green 15 years ago.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Yep. Well, let me go back to economics, because that is one of the things that you wrote this book about how we restore how we restore balance to our economy, how it starts to work for people who are actually working as opposed to people who are just owning. And tariffs aren't the only thing this guy's doing that are counterproductive. Talk about if to the extent that you can find any sense in his economic, I don't want to call it policies, his economic behavior. What do you see?
Well, I see a lot of traditional Milton Friedman-esque supply side stuff. I mean, everybody says Trump's not a neoliberal, which means, like Milton Friedman, believer in free markets and low regulation, because of the tariffs and because of trade and because of this and because of that. And those are, I grant, those are exceptions to that worldview. But when push comes to shove, he's the same. He wants a huge tax cut for corporations and rich people. He wants to, slash regulations left, right, and center. And he wants to cut domestic spending to the bone. So he's proposed, $7 trillion in tax cuts, and the Republicans want to cut $4.5 trillion in domestic spending. That's mostly, of course, going to go at poor people and going to go at public services that we all use. But do that math. It's going to add up to another massive budget deficit. And this is another thing I wrote about in this last column that I wish more people in this country knew. Ever since George H.W. Bush, going back to Jimmy Carter, Republicans have added, these numbers are true, Republican presidents have added $3.8 trillion to the deficit, and Democrats have reduced the deficit by $2.3 trillion.
Right.
Does anybody in America know this? No. That's another thing I blame on the Democrats, too. Everybody should know that there should be a billboard every 10 miles across the country. But putting that aside, it's a fact. Republicans run up the deficit. They cry about the deficit all the time when there's a Democratic president, but they're the ones who run up the deficit. George W. Bush.
George W. Bush ran that huge war in Iraq without asking us to pay for it.
Right. He added $1.5 trillion to the deficit. And remember, he came into office with what, Edwin? A budget surplus.
Budget surplus. I was part of that government. Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah. I worked in the administration.
So you remember, $236 billion in the black.
Yep. Last time that happened. And in fairness, some of it was a bubble. You got a lot of money.
Some of it was, but that's true. But the numbers are the numbers. If there had been a Republican president in office, you think they wouldn't be bragging about it?
Oh my God! Of course they would. Of course they would. Well, these tax cuts are crazy, and I've talked to lifelong Republicans, business Republicans, who say this isn't the time for that. I'm doing okay. This isn't the time for that. They're actually worried. They bought the years of conversation about the deficit, and they are worried about it. And I can say, whatever the conversation is, Trump's a madman. He's trying to stop everybody from voting. They say, well, what about the deficit? Okay, all right, that's your issue. What about it? And they say, well, this is probably not the time for tax cuts. But what are you guys going to do about it? So maybe we need.
What about the deficit? I wish I was in the room when they asked you what about the deficit.
Yeah. They're not defending Trump, but they are worried that if we get rid of him, we'll spend too much.
Okay. Fine. Everybody blames the American Rescue Plan, Biden, $1.9 trillion for inflation. Trump passed the CARES Act right after the pandemic hit, which was a very similar bill, pandemic relief spending, $2.3 trillion. Trump spent more than Biden.
And by the way, he also decided it was important to make sure his name was on every check that went out.
Yeah, right. Well, of course.
Yeah. Just pettiness is. Anyway, so the first big test of flexing the public muscles is going to come on April 5th. Lots of organizers are planning an enormous set of rallies across the country. And, I'll be part of it. I'm sure lots of people are going to be out there. It'll be interesting to see, they're now waiting for the warm weather. But, Michael, I told the guy when he said it that, they'll get a crowd in April. But this is going to be, to coin a phrase from a different miserable era, a long, hot summer.
Yeah. I'm all for it, of course. I hope there are massive turnouts everywhere, particularly in cities in red states. And but it needs to be sustained too. It needs to be ongoing. You can't just show up one day.
Nope, not one and done.
And then forget about
it. The damage to farmers. Oh my gosh. The damage to rural hospitals. Oh my gosh. The damage to rural schools. I mean, when they privatize all those schools in all those states, who's going to open one? When they got 11 students in the county, it's going to be brutal for the hardcore Trump base.
And Democrats really need to highlight these things. They should go into red states and red congressional districts, even if it's not their district, and hold press conferences and say, look, this hospital is closing. Here are the ramifications, and bring this to people's attention. In other words, reach out to constituencies that aren't theirs. This is another thing I think they don't do a very good job of, and reach out to farmers. Chuck Schumer represents a lot of farmers. There's a lot of farmers in upstate New York. A lot of Democratic senators represent a lot of farmers. Bernie Sanders represents a ton of farmers.
Yep.
Highlight them.
Well, we tend to look at our most our loudest base. And frankly, our base doesn't always like it when we talk to everybody else either. So everybody's got to just chill out and say, we're in this together. That's what coalitions are.
Right. And that's what a popular front is. That's what a popular front is. There was a time I didn't think I'd be on the same team as, Bill Kristol, for example, but,
Right.
I welcome him
to the fight, Bill.
Yeah, and I welcome him to the fight, and he's very effective at it. He's really effective at it.
Yeah. Well, we've run out of time quickly, as usual. Listen, all of you who are listening, read Michael Tomasky's stuff. It's great. Read The New Republic. It's great. And you know what? If that means you spend one last day, reading the columnists of the New York Times, it won't hurt you.
Touche.
Thank you, Michael, as always.
Great chat. Really enjoy it, as always.
Yep, me too. Take care. All right, everybody, we are going to take a break. We're going to have some news and a fabulous conversation that I actually taped yesterday with Ezra Levin, the co-founder of Indivisible, is coming right after that.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm joined now by Bill Scher. He is, of course, the political editor of the Washington Monthly. His latest newsletter argues that Democrats deserve more credit than they're getting for pushing back against the horrors of the Trump administration. And not only that, he argues that those efforts are actually showing signs of success. From your mouth to God's ears, Bill.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Talk about that. That's fascinating.
Well, I mean, it's not like Democrats are doing something very creative or innovative. But they are speaking out against Elon Musk's seizure of the federal government. They protested the gutting of our foreign aid program through USAID. They have criticized Trump's executive orders for violating the Constitution. There are Democratic state attorneys general and other progressive legal organizations that have sued on many of these grounds. And there are demonstrable successes here. Donald Trump's job approval dropped about 7 points over the course of the first month plus in the Real Clear Politics average. Elon Musk's approval is even worse. The public shows there's some consultants that thought that defending foreign aid was a loser, but we see in polls that actually people don't want it gutted. We have news coverage about how the University of Michigan consumer sentiment poll, consumer sentiment dropped, I believe, 10 points in the most recent survey, driven by inflation fears. And those inflation fears are driven by Trump's erratic tariff policies. And there are several court cases where Democrats have won temporary stays, even at the Supreme Court level. So what in this suggests to you that there's impotence here? This is a pretty, you look at, most presidents have a honeymoon period. This is not a honeymoon period.
No,
this is hitting public resistance very quickly.
Yeah. So my guess is that we live in an era where people just want to see leaders, and they want to see a Democrat foil to Trump, one person who speaks for us all, standing up there and denouncing him. And that's not how it works. And what you're really pointing out is an important lesson for everybody in America, that the opposition to this is diffuse and multi-pronged with lots of strategies, including, by the way, people taking to the streets, going to court, supporting their neighbors and friends who are actually feeling the impact of what this madman is doing in office. So it doesn't feel like leadership in the way Americans are used to, but you're right to point out that it's actually being effective.
Well, I mean, beyond the desire to have like a singular charismatic leader, which we don't have and are not going to have, and it's not really fair to expect that until you have a presidential primary and someone is nominated.
Yeah.
Power is diffuse in this system.
As it should be.
I think people sometimes have unrealistic expectations. You know, you're not going to stop all damage. You're not going to win every court case. You're not going to stop every bill from becoming law when you do not have majority control of either chamber. If you have individuals in government like Musk who are just asserting power that they don't have, I mean, again, as Alexander Hamilton said in Federalist 78, the judicial branch is the weakest of the branches. They don't have their own enforcement power. But without an independent judiciary, all is really lost. The fact that Musk has been slowed at all is a success. You cannot expect him to be wholly throttled immediately if someone is going to take these risks with our constitutional system of government. So you have to keep your expectations in check. But the fact that the public has been aroused, they have been riled up. They're not giving Trump. I mean, it's still a pretty divided country, of course. I can't argue with you that, you know, Trump's approval's fallen through the floor. But there was this moment in January where it seemed like he was just going to get a run of the place and people were just going to bow down to him. That's not what's happening. People have dug in their heels. And the media coverage has shifted. The media coverage has picked up on the sentiment in the public and the shift in polling. And they're raising concerns about the economic instability and about the threats to the Constitution. So, you know, this is about as good as you can expect 2 months in. And one other data point I'd add here, I mean, and granted the polling is pretty sparse at this point, but we have one recent poll that shows Democrats up 3 in the so-called generic congressional ballot test. Who do you plan to vote for in the next congressional election? And in North Carolina, we have a poll with the former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper beating the incumbent Republican Tom Tillis by 4 points. Yep. Now, it's not realistic to expect Democrats to claim the Senate. I don't totally discount it, but it's a very hard map. But the House should be very winnable for Democrats in 2026. I mean, even Trump could be doing better than this, and Democrats could pick up 5 seats. I mean, almost every midterm election, the out party picks up at least 4 seats. It's like one example in the past 75 years when that's not the case. So Democrats have to really blow it to not pick up the House. And the way things are going at this point, you'd say looks like pretty much a shoo-in. So things are pointed in a pretty decent direction, all things considered. Not to say that's not going to be damage and harm. There will be, but that's not the Democrats' fault. That's the Republicans' fault.
Yeah, as long as we get to vote and the votes get to count, I'm confident we will show up. And I know they are doing what they can to make that not happen. And that is really frustrating and frightening.
Well, people have reason to be panicked about the worst because many horrible things are happening. But there isn't much justification to worry that we're not going to have an election.
No, I agree with that. But they have elections in Russia. They have elections in Iran. You know, they have elections in Pakistan. But
American elections are not run from the federal government. Donald Trump does not run the election system. We have a diffuse election system with 50 secretaries of state. They are not all MAGAites. Very, very few are. And the worst, the truly dystopian scenario is that the Supreme Court imposes some kind of martial law and allows corrupt election counts to become valid and throws people off the ballot that shouldn't be thrown off the ballot or puts people on that shouldn't be put on. That we haven't had that. Even as horrible as the Supreme Court is, they didn't throw the election to Trump in 2020. when Donald Trump tried. And just the fact that this week we had a case where Roberts and Barrett sided with the liberals on a case involving foreign aid payments. Again, it's not the end of the story. Maybe Republicans will win that case once it gets fully adjudicated. I don't know. Yeah. But it is an indication that you do not have 6 Republican justices doing anything Trump wants at all times. The independent judiciary still exists.
I agree with that.
And so I wouldn't assume that elections are going to be negated by them.
No, it's harder in states where they are. I mean, North Carolina is thinking about throwing 65,000 people off in order to take an election for a Supreme Court judge, as we know, right? They are willing to do things that are way out of bounds and are pushing the system in dangerous places, in dangerous ways.
Where they can, I agree. But to do that on a mass scale, I just don't see it practically possible.
Yeah. Well, good, because we're going to think show up in mass next time. I think Democrats are divided in how to fight back. I mean, it goes back to what you were saying before. It is a diverse attack. What did you think? I mean, I'm asking this of everybody today. What did you think of Alyssa Slotkin's response? What did you think of, Al Green's behavior during that speech? And what did you think of the Democrats who joined in the censure vote?
Well, I mean, I don't like the open dissension. What I mean by that is the divergence of tactics. There was a desire on the part of Democratic leadership to let Slotkin run point on it. Let her be the voice. Don't do things on the floor that are going to distract from that, because that's just going to split our message. And you had backbiters saying, we don't really like what you're doing. We think this is too soft, too restrained. We think we should be more confrontational, and therefore we're gonna dress how we want. We're gonna have our paddles, and we're gonna have Al Green, I think, acted on his own. And so it's led to this multi-day news cycle of Democrats in disarray, which is not ideal. So I don't have necessarily like a strong opinion whether one tactic is better than another in a particular case. What's ideal is to have agreement on the tactic for that day, so you're focusing on the message and not on a debate about tactics. And while one could nitpick what Slotkin said, what she left out, or the way things were framed, or a nod to Reagan, or whatever, you can always complain about something. But on the whole, I thought it was on point. Having an emphasis on the economy and national security, I thought was totally valid. You might be annoyed that she didn't mention abortion or transgender rights, but I don't think she threw any of those things under the bus in doing so. So in that respect, I think it was fine, and she shouldn't hurt herself. Many people don't even survive that speech with their career intact. Right. No, so kudos for her for getting through it.
I thought it was great. I think it's okay to go high ground and not cover all the ground in the time you have, particularly when the speech before you was, Castro-esque in its length.
Right. Yeah. And so if we were to focus on that content, I think Democrats would have been better off. But I don't want to be a nitpicker either. Yeah. On the whole, the focus is on what Trump is doing, and a good number of people don't like what Trump is doing.
Yep. And Musk. I mean, Musk, I think, couldn't get elected to a city council anywhere in the country today. He's that unpopular. And that can't help but rub off on all of them.
I mean, if you're a Republican, there are times when politicians do things that are unpopular in the moment, but pay off later. Obamacare was not popular at first, but once it got going, people took to it, and attempts to repeal it are the things that became unpopular. And I understand that you can certainly find polls that say people want less spending or they want smaller government. And so if you're a Republican, you might say, well, this is disruptive now, but they're gonna like it, a year from now. And my response to that, if I was a Republican political consultant, I would say, what about Donald Trump, let alone Elon Musk, makes you confident this is going to be executed in some sort of professional manner where a year from now people are going to be happy about this. I've nothing of what this person has done in his life, meaning Trump, suggests a level of care or interest in professional execution of ideas. And you're already seeing disruption that is causing harm to people, and the potential for more severe harm in the near future. And if you got to run for office in 2026, you got to worry about that sort of thing. If I were Republicans, I'd be far more nervous about where this is headed than whatever squabbling is going on with the Democrats.
I agree with you, and I think they are nervous. And I think if we drive the president's poll numbers into the 30s, every one of them is going to say, well, who's this guy Musk and why is he in the room? It'll be like a sight that we haven't seen. It'll be so beautiful to watch.
Yeah, I mean, even low 40s, I think, would cause a fair amount of panic in Republican quarters. And look, they have. I from a detached perspective, I sympathize with the political plight. If you break from Trump now, you risk a primary challenge wherever you are. But if you're in a district that is remotely competitive in a midterm year, which usually goes in the opposition's way. To survive, you're probably going to have to create some distance between yourself and the president. Yep. And then the question really is sort of, when do you make that pivot? When is it safe to make that pivot? Yeah. And so I would understand not wanting to stick your neck out now, but I might want to be careful how much you say on the record today in aligned with Trump that could be used against you next year.
Well, I mean, there's been sort of recent studies of where this Republican Party falls amongst political parties around the world, and they are, as radical right, anti-democratic as you can find. I think ordinary Americans, when they wake up, are going to say, "What did we just do?" But let me ask you a different question. I have no patience for politicians who live and die by the polls. In effect saying, look, as long as Trump is popular, we shouldn't really attack him directly. Let's wait till his numbers come down. And you've heard that from a lot of people, and I have too. I have limitless patience for those who use their voices to reshape the American narrative along lines that protect and strengthen our democracy. And that's why I like what Alyssa Slotkin tried to do. I hear a lot of, let's let Trump just destroy himself. Let's wait a little longer. But that misses the point. We have a chance to change the way Americans think about our democracy. And that's not going to happen by following polls.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, James Carville had that point, play dead and let Republicans, hang themselves. There's a certain amount of truth to that. You don't have to try to block every last thing. You couldn't even if you wanted to, right. For Republicans to hurt themselves. But you do want to get in that news cycle. You do want to make the point about what is wrong with what is happening and start articulating what the alternative looks like. So when the day comes, when everything really comes crashing down, you've laid down a foundation for what you think the alternative is, and that you're prepared to deliver it. Which again, it's very hard for Democrats to literally not find a microphone at all every single day. The bookers are going to call someone in Congress, and someone's going to talk. Yep. And they're doing that. So it's all for a moot point. They do that every day, and it helps shape news coverage. These things all, work together. The combination of what Democratic office holders say, what citizens say in town halls, what the poll numbers say, what business executives say when they express their nervousnesses about tariffs and whatnot. It all comes together. If it doesn't come together, if just one piece of it and the other pieces don't come into play, then it doesn't work. But there's plenty of material to work with here to move the dial, and the dial is being moved.
Okay, can you hear me?
I didn't for the last 10 seconds, but I do now.
Sorry about that. I don't actually think Carville believes what he's saying. He's too smart. I think he has going out on a limb in order to create space for Democrats, and also because maybe he has somebody in mind and he wants to create space for particular people. But he's never shied away from a fight. So I just think he's creating space.
I mean, maybe what he was getting at, Democrats have to do something very difficult, have to navigate something very difficult very soon, which is potential government shutdown. So it's very easy to say, you should resist everything. But here's a case where if you're not careful, harm is going to be inflicted on the public and you might get blamed for it. Yeah. Right now, all the harm that's happening is very squarely falling on Republican shoulders. Democrats should not want to shift that dynamic. And if a shutdown does happen, you want to make very clear that it's not because of anything Democrats did, it's because of something Republicans did. So if there is, to give a very specific example here, if Democrats said, well, let me take a step back. Go back to Ted Cruz and 2013. I think it was 13 or 14. When Ted Cruz said, unless we repeal Obamacare, defund Obamacare, we're not going to keep the government open. Yeah. Now, I think the polls at that point, or you certainly could have found polls that said Obamacare is unpopular. So they made a calculation. Well, people don't like Obamacare. If I'm seen as fighting to get rid of Obamacare, we're going to look great. And just because people didn't like Obamacare in that moment doesn't mean they wanted you to shut the government down in service of that cause. Linking the two took what had been a popular position and made it an unpopular position. Yes. So if Democrats today said, boy, people really don't want these Medicaid cuts that Republicans are cooking up in a separate piece of legislation, if I make a demand that we won't keep the government open unless you shelve those cuts, you may well take what had been a popular position and turn it into an unpopular one. You're putting a demand on what should be a basic function, keeping the government open, and now taking an extra political demand on top of it. And all evidence is that voters don't like that.
I think the only demand that the Democrats are going to make, and really make, is that when Congress passes a budget, it's the law.
And I 100% agree with that. That to me is a illegal. Fair demand.
And that is it, right? Why should I help you pass a budget if it's meaningless? If it's the president can do whatever he wants, and this is just handing him cash. That is a fair ask.
I think it's a fair ask. I think it's communicable. Yep. I mean, it's a little delicate, again, because you are making a demand as opposed to no demands. But it's fair to say if we negotiate funding levels with Republicans, and hey, you got to cut a bit, we can accept that. Not Doge level cuts, but you are the majority. We understand. You want to trim some places. We get it. We'll work with you on that to do it carefully. But whatever we negotiate has to actually be law. Otherwise, what are we doing here? Congress doesn't exist if this isn't law. And if you don't want to play it that way, Republicans, then, hey, you keep the government open. You're the majority. Do it in your reconciliation bill. You have the power. Have at it. Yep. We don't want it shut down, but if you want our help doing it, you got to do at least that much. I think that's a fair position.
Absolutely. And by the way, if they don't do it, people like me are going to rise up and burn the house down, because you just do not hand these felons trillions of dollars to do whatever they want with.
That might get a little dicey. I mean, if Democrats ended up not demanding that at the end of the day, I suspect progressives might get over it soon enough and be more concerned about what Trump is doing. But I do think Democrats.
But what he would do would be terrible.
I mean, what he would do is just not spend on things, and I mean, you'd still litigate it in courts, which has already happened. I mean, there's an argument that you don't need to spell it out in legislation because it's already the case that the president can't impound, and you still have the fight separately. But I think it is reasonable for Democrats to say, look, just put it in the bill so there's no question about it here.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Well, every week there's a new surprise, a new horror, a new. And we have not really done a very good job of getting ahead of any of it because they are so creative in their destruction. But I saw, Bill, one scholar in the UK took the time to take all of the things that Trump had done and just categorize them in the buckets that are used by people who study democracy and say, these are the things that get eroded when you want to get rid of a democracy. And there are, 5 of them, and they just put them all there. These are the attacks on civil society. These are the attacks on the media. These are the attacks on education. These are the attacks on a functioning government. These are the attacks on voting. And they fit so nicely. I wonder if we don't need some kind of agreement about how to think about all of these things that he's doing.
I mean, it's a lot all at once, which makes, any kind of messaging, a challenge. At some point you got to pick your spots to explain what you have to focus on. But I think, we had this article in Politico earlier where David Axelrod and Rahm Emanuel, and I'm not huge haters of either one of these people. I'm not someone who goes out of their way to find fault with them. But they did the kind of classic political consulting thing and said, oh, polls show people don't like foreign aid. Hey, Democrats, don't die on that U.S. aid hill, because you're on the wrong side of the argument.
Well, they got proven wrong on that.
Exactly, and quite quickly.
In full disclosure, Bill, David managed my aldermanic reelection campaign way back when.
I mean, I think on the whole, David Axelrod's a perfectly good guy. And I just disagree with him on this one point because I thought he was taking too cramped a reading of the polling. So when I say you got to pick your spots, I'm not saying you have to do it in a way that is myopic and throws away, core principles. It's just that you can't go on TV and make 50 points all in a 60-second soundbite. It's just not physically possible. So you got to find a way to boil things down. And that just requires some forethought and coordination. But I do think it's very doable for Democrats.
I do too. And apparently it was very doable for the dean of Georgetown Law, who wrote an absolutely beautiful letter. Did you see his letter?
I did not.
He wrote, the administration, these geniuses in the Justice Department in Washington said, we are not hiring anybody who graduates from your school until you get rid of DEI and prove that you've done it. And he wrote back, he said, are you really telling a Jesuit Catholic private school how we achieve our mission? And by the way, the law is on our side. And by the way, I await your letter telling me you will not, that my graduates will get a full and fair treatment when they apply.
Well, it's a great example of how politically ham-fisted what Trump and Musk are doing. You go back to, the Bush-Rove strategy.
Yeah.
Rove was a political tactician, and I'm not arguing that he was a genius in every respect. I think he did some things that were very foolish. But he did have a sense of how do you build a majority coalition? How do we add to what's in the existing Republican base? And so he had thoughts about, faith-based, having an Office of Faith-Based Initiatives to try to expand that pool. He had thoughts about Medicare prescription drug benefit to bring out seniors, to have No Child Left Behind, to bring in suburban parents, and some of these things, obviously work better than others. The Medicaid prescription drug benefit is still here, and people rely on it. No Child Left Behind is more controversial. So again, it's not that everything he did, turned to gold, but there was at least some thought. How do we build a coalition? And the Musk strategy, the move fast and break things strategy, puts zero thought into who gets hurt in the process, because there are things that they are doing that are hurting their own people in their existing coalition.
If you're a farmer and you rely on a rural hospital or a rural school, you are out of luck.
Yeah. So sometimes I think, Trump is just not someone who thinks 12 steps down the road. So if he screws over farmers today, maybe I'll give him a bailout tomorrow and I'll try to fix it that way. That's the way they think.
This is what makes me nervous about their plans for our democracy. Everybody else understands you have to actually win the votes. These guys, I think, are not trying to win the votes anymore. And that makes me nervous.
Well, I think it's less about having a thought-through plan to bring fascism to America and just folks who don't really care about thinking through things at all. Donald Trump will not be on the ballot in 2028. He just will not. They can talk about it. They can muse about it. They can try to make it happen.
I agree.
I think on some level Trump does know this, and I think Trump is just someone who doesn't really care. I hate to play mind reader with Trump because you're trying to enter into a very addled brain, which is a very difficult job. Yeah. But I have no reason to believe that he cares about the future. He doesn't care about the future of the Republican Party, doesn't care about the future of the country, doesn't care about who he passes the torch to, doesn't care about the midterm elections. He cares about being the dominant figure in the 24/7 news cycle that's in front of him in whatever disruptive or chaotic way suits his impulses in that moment. It's not a game plan for building a durable political coalition.
That, thankfully, I hope you're right, and that's a great way to end. Bill, as always, it's wonderful catching up. I love these conversations. I like the way you think about this stuff.
My pleasure. Good to talk to you.
Yep. All right, everybody. That was Washington Monthly's political editor, Bill Scher. Fabulous. Read the Washington Monthly, read Bill. And I've given you 2 magazines to read this show. We're going to take a break, and I'm going to talk to folks at PEN America when we come back.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. Hadar Harris is the managing director of PEN America's operation in Washington, D.C. Those of you who listen to this show regularly will remember PEN America as a champion of free speech and free thought in America, and that PEN, the organization, large organization, is a champion all over the world. Hadar is an attorney who comes to this work after an impactful couple of decades of human rights work that gave her a broad and multinational perspective on issues that are now central to the future of our own democracy and civil society. Hello, Hadar. Welcome.
Thank you so much. That was kind of the perfect, deep breath and introduction.
Well, the deep breath is because I actually ran to get a cup of tea during the break because my throat is... Okay. So it's out of breath rather than deep breath.
Before we talk about, struggles of free speech and stuff, I always have to take a deep breath. So, I hear you.
Well, okay. So your colleague, Jeremy, has been a great contributor to this show and talked a lot about, what PEN is doing. But let me pose the question in a just horrible way. So I'm going to ask your forgiveness in advance. We are losing the fight for free speech, for free expression, for free thought. J.D. Vance, oh my gosh. I mean, he supports suing reporters who tell the truth here, and he goes to Europe to lecture Germans that restricting Nazi propaganda is the biggest challenge to human freedom on the planet. And ABC News caved to pressure and paid Mr. Trump for the crime of telling the truth on This Week in George Stephanopoulos. And CBS is telling the reporters in 60 Minutes to fall in line so they can do the same thing. And the Washington Post has gone from banning editorial criticism of Trump to laying down some guidelines for their reporters as well. And still the stuff that you guys focus on, book bans are, they're still going on full speed. Faculty are being forced to abandon or to not to adopt curriculum by forces outside their institution. And now we see the whole NGO sector facing propaganda tests. What does this fight look like now?
Well, gee, thanks for that. Yeah, deep breath.
Am I wrong?
You know what? You're right on the facts in terms of, yes, all of those things are happening. But are we losing the battle for free speech? I don't believe that for a second. I think that the way in which the battle is being fought may be changing, and the places and the ways in which we have to struggle for ensuring that there is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and even a larger freedom of thought and inquiry and education on a lot of different levels requires us to be kind of vigilant. But I'll tell you, as we think about censorship and we think about kind of the ways in which this is manifesting in a variety of different ways, the secret weapon that we have are people who continue to think and think for themselves and speak out in a variety of different ways and continue to kind of wage this fight on a personal level as well as on an institutional level. We can talk about that more. But, the truth is that, yes, there are really serious challenges. But I don't believe that we are losing that battle. I just believe that we have to kind of pivot a little bit to address things one at a time and as a whole.
So I'm glad you said that. I don't really think we're losing the battle either, notwithstanding what I said at the beginning. But I think we have lost a lot of ground. And I think that it was important, I'm afraid, for us to lose this ground in order to recognize how much we value what we've had.
Yeah, some people are kind of identifying this moment as one of a oh my goodness, I'm going to lose the analogy. When you pull back, like it's a kid's toy that you pull back and you shoot an arrow forward or you shoot a rock forward, slingshot. But it's a slingshot moment. We kind of made advances. We moved forward over the last couple decades in a variety of different ways in the acknowledgement of lived experiences, of diversity of voices, of recognition of rights. And now we've kind of pulled the slingshot backwards. And there's a retrenchment. And in history, you see this over and over again in a variety of different ways and in a variety of different times. And the hope is that, once you pull the slingshot back, what happens to it? You let it go and it moves forward again. It moves forward even further than where it was before, because this battle that you very correctly outlined at the beginning is one which makes us actually have to really recognize what's important. And,
right.
What is important is ideas. What is important is a free press. What is important is education at the K through 12 level, at the university and higher education level. What is important is the work of civil society and nonprofit organizations where I've spent almost my entire career. And what is important is the rule of law and due process and having a clear understanding of actually what words mean and concepts mean and laws mean, which is being really attempted to be distorted right now, which is making this moment feel very chaotic and which may be contributing to us feeling a little bit like we're losing the battle when in fact just the terms have been changed.
Yeah, and I think they have clawed back some ground for sure. I mean, book bans are real and they're hurting. They've definitely clawed back ground, but I take your point that this may be a Pyrrhic victory on their part. They may have tried to hide behind some family values issues, but everybody hates book bans. Everybody hates telling schools what they should teach. It seems Maoist and very un-American.
Absolutely. Listen, we're in opposite land here, right? We have an executive order talking about ending radical indoctrination in K through 12 schools, which is all about imposing indoctrination in K through 12 schools. We have letters from the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education talking about, illegal discrimination and the enforcement of civil rights laws to actually do the opposite of enforcing civil rights laws. So there's all kinds of kind of trivialization of these core concepts, and I don't want you to think that, I am accused of being kind of the voice of doom. Anybody that talks to me, because I can kind of go through similar to what you did at the begining and talk about kind of
at the beginning. I know.
Well, but I know you really took the wind out of my balloon here. And so, but we have four major buckets, I would say, of real challenge happening right now, which creates this chaos and this feeling that we're losing ground. And it's a really important and difficult fight. So I'll give you the 4 buckets. One is kind of this attack and this demand for ideological conformity in culture and in free expression. So what you outlined in terms of attacks on the press, right? The marginalization and the exclusion of the Associated Press from the White House press pool because they're not using Gulf of America and they are continuing to use Gulf of Mexico. You've got the takeover of the Kennedy Center, where the president ousted a bunch of board members from the Kennedy Center board of directors and was installed as the new chairperson, something that's unprecedented. It's never been done before. And when he did that, he tweeted that he's going to usher in a golden age of culture and get rid of all this woke stuff. You've got restrictions on grant proposals for the National Endowment of the Arts and the National Endowment of Humanities, requiring a kind of litmus test that you certify that you are complying with all executive orders, including those restricting DEI programming and any kind of quote-unquote radical gender ideology. Some of that has been enjoined in courts now. And so there's this broad attack on culture, free expression, and demand for ideological conformity. There's the attacks on education. So, you rightfully said, and my colleague Jeremy Young has been very articulate about the attacks on universities, on K through 12 education, in terms of, again, the ways in which these executive orders are being interpreted and applied, even though maybe they have been over complied with in terms of where their actual legal standing is at the moment. We can talk about that more. The targeting of NGOs and civil society. Last night there was an executive order that was signed about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And while on one hand, that's not exactly a free expression issue, it is very interesting to look at this EO, which doesn't scale it back, but it does instruct the Secretary of Education to look at and the Secretary of the Treasury to look at how they're going to do it. But it focuses it lays out kind of the different kinds of nonprofit organizations and service organizations that they're going to be looking at and targeting: immigrants and refugee rights organizations, transgender rights organizations, racial justice organizations. And there's kind of this weird, broad language about people who are engaged in tortious behavior, which could be civil disobedience, very broad and sweeping. And then the last bucket that I would say, sorry, I've been going on for a while, but I've been thinking about this for a while, is sort of this trivialization of core concepts that are really meant to undermine rule of law and destabilize institutions in a variety of different ways. So like I said before, there's this sort of twisting of the concept of what civil rights are and what illegal discrimination means. The whole concept of what DEI is, the concept of what gender is, and even the concept of what anti-Semitism is, and the way that it is being instrumentalized to undermine higher education as a whole. So there are very real issues and problems with anti-Semitism, with civil rights, with discrimination, and all of this is being twisted on its head to undermine institutions in ways that will kind of comport with this ideological approach to things, and to not necessarily go through the legal processes or to comply with the law, but to really impose a particular vision of free expression, a particular vision of free speech, and a particular vision of, the golden age of America.
So I love listening to this. If I just describe those same 4 buckets with slightly different words, you have what all scholars have agreed is the Hungarian model for destroying a democracy. You find some broad mainstream culture, and you say anybody who isn't in it isn't one of us. You undercut the institutions that offer any alternative source of truth, and that's education and civil society and the media. And you take the ideas that anybody's cared about and you lie about them so much nobody knows what they mean anymore.
Yep.
And that, right? That this is a well-trod path to an end of a great democracy, except that you're confident they won't get away with it. And I think I am.
No, Ed, I'm not confident that they're not going to get away with it. I think that it is up to all of us, every single person that lives in this country, to ensure that they're not going to get away with it. I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., and I tried to explain to my colleagues in other parts of the country, like, what it's like to be here right now. It's hard it really is hard to explain kind of the onslaught and the very real fear. Now, I've been doing this work for a long time, and I've been doing it all over the world. And so this playbook is very familiar to me.
Yeah.
And watching how it is being played out is also what you just said in terms of, like, this is the Hungarian model. It's not just the Hungarian model. I mean, it's the Russian model. It's all kinds of places. But capturing and framing the narrative, right, and doing that through the journalists and a crackdown on press freedom, culture, a crackdown on cultural institutions, writers, authors, playwrights, the nonprofit sector, right? That's the first step, because when you can control the narrative, then you can control the ideas. We haven't even said the D word, disinformation, and the way in which disinformation is playing a huge role. Yeah.
I mean, and all of this is done in all these countries with the willing participation of vastly wealthy people who see themselves as future oligarchs.
But you know what else it is? Yes, that's true. But you know how else these guys come to power and how they sustain their power is through people not participating, meaning they're just kind of sitting it out and letting it happen. And you saw that in Hungary, where the biggest problem in Orban coming to power was the number of people who didn't vote against him.
And we saw it overturned in Poland because people turned out.
You saw it overturned in Poland, exactly.
Yeah. So that's why I am confident, because I think I agree with you. This is not up to anybody but us. But I think the us is going to show up. And I see it. I mean, Elon Musk couldn't get elected to the Chicago City Council today. He's that unpopular, and that's rubbing off. And it's tornado season coming in the Midwest, and they're not going to have tornado sirens because they've cut the funding to the Weather Service. And I mean, the damage they're doing is so real.
Yep.
I mean, honestly, if they weren't so stupid, they might get away with it, but the damage is going to impact people in their base. Rural hospitals are going to close. It's just so depressing.
But I think that is the moment at which people will start to wake up. I think, we're seeing already a little bit of a pullback on some things because of the outcries. So, for example, 2 times already, we've been on standby, understanding there's an executive order coming that the Department of Education is going to be closed. Now, the President of the United States cannot unilaterally, by executive order, close the Department of Education. It was mandated by Congress. Only Congress can do that. But he can do a lot of things to undermine it. And even in her confirmation hearing, Secretary McMahon said, we should just reorganize things and move things off to other departments. There's been huge outcry about the closure of the Department of Education, the imminent closure of the Department of Education, and also kind of a recognition of, like, what are you actually going to do? How are you going to ensure that there are school lunches still being supported? How are rural schools and rural school and under-resourced school districts going to get their support? And so those have been, that executive order continues to kind of be pushed off. It, maybe tonight or tomorrow it's going to be signed, and then you can prove me wrong. But there's been a delay in that. There's been a pullback in some of the, at least, rhetoric or commitment to cutting back on the Department of Veterans Affairs, because there's been such an outcry by veterans and an understanding that would really impact a huge swath of supporters. And so, the organizing is still very, very important from a free expression point of view, ensuring that people are getting true and accurate news about what's happening, and also that protest rights are not being impacted is really very important, because those create the enabling environment to ensure that people are engaged and involved.
So I have two related questions about this. Sure. And they are triggered in part by your talk about the weird ideas of anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. One is Marco Rubio saying, I'm going to use AI to sweep all the social media of every student who has a visa in order to figure out whether they attended a rally because they thought maybe what was going on in Gaza was overboard. And then they're going to be Hamas sympathizers and we're going to kick them out of the country. Regardless of what you think of that protest, this is perfecting the technology of tyranny that they will then use on somebody else and somebody else and somebody else until there's nobody left. So that one terrifies me. And it's related to the other one, which was waking up this morning and reading that the federal government has stripped $400 million in federal contracts from Columbia University, ostensibly because they didn't protect their Jewish students. I am Jewish, and I know people who went to Columbia, and it wasn't always a happy experience for everybody on either side, for sure. But I'm not aware that anybody lost their life or anything like that for $400 million. And there are plenty of people in America who have that are getting plenty of contracts from these guys.
Yeah, listen, the issue around anti-Semitism is complicated, sensitive, and is very real, right? There's a very real problem in this country about anti-Semitism, right? The FBI last year, showed a huge increase in the number of hate crimes against totally Jewish people, right? And there is a big problem.
Big problem.
Big problem. So nothing I'm saying right now is to undercut that or to negate that, right?
It's an excuse for what these guys are doing. But the bigger,
right. So how I'm seeing this, and I will say that I too am Jewish and have, kids, friends who are at Columbia and have followed very closely what's going on. There is real anti-Semitism, and there is also a very cynical instrumentalization of anti-Semitism specifically to undermine higher education. And I think that we're not saying that, and we're not seeing that, and we're not showing that clearly enough right now. So schools have an obligation under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, right, to provide a safe and accessible environment to any student that goes there. Right. But this fight against anti-Semitism, as I think you just kind of laid out really well, is being used as a pretense. It's being used as a pretense to shut down protests, to constrain research, to restrict curriculum, and even to restrict access for students to campus. And it's being sort of used as a foil. Again, that's not to say there isn't real anti-Semitism that needs to be addressed. But the cutting back of $400 million in grants and contracts to Columbia University, right, both is kind of crazy and is also illegal. I mean, I'll just put it that way. There's been no investigation. There's been no due process. There's no clarity about what it is, how it is, when it is. It's an arbitrary withholding of money by the executive branch that's been contracted already without any kind of process involved. It was just this big announcement yesterday. So I'm sure that's going to be litigated, right? But it's also something that has been thrown down in a really obvious attempt to create a chilling effect for other campuses.
Well,
and the AI stuff that you're talking about, right, is sorry, I was just going to say that the last thing is like all of this, and the reason that I say that it's sort of a pretext, again, not undermining the fact that there is very real anti-Semitism that needs to be addressed, but this is perfecting the processes through which people can be identified as terrorist supporters, domestic terrorist supportors, and
Absolutely
any kind
right.
of dissent is cracked down on.
Absolutely.
Which is why I pointed to the categories of nonprofit organizations that last night's EO about the student loan repayment program, the public interest repayment program, is focusing on, because I promise you, I hope I'm wrong, but you know, this kind of, I really want to be wrong, that this laid out for us kind of all of the categories of nonprofit organizations that are being perceived as activities that have a substantial illegal purpose. I wrote it down because that's the language in the EO, that individuals who are employed by organizations whose activities have substantial illegal purpose will not be eligible for the public service loan forgiveness program.
Yeah, well, l'état c'est moi, I guess. I mean, I just
listen. That's why I like to go to sleep at 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock at night before all the EOs come out, because otherwise I can't sleep at night.
I mean, I just want to the interim president of Columbia University. They have an interim president because they got rid of the last one over the same issue. Came out immediately and said, "Oh, we're going to work hard to address the legitimate concerns that President Trump has raised about all of these issues." Whereas the dean of the law school at Georgetown, when he faced a similar attack from the federal government, wrote back, and I think he wrote with his middle finger raised, a much tougher response. And I am all for the dean of Georgetown law, and I'm appalled at the disgrace to Columbia University of this. Oh, it's legitimate concerns stuff, because he's not doing the simple thing that you and I just did. There are legitimate concerns, and they have nothing to do with what the president is doing.
Right. And what the president's doing is illegal. You know, the last thing that I would say is, like, they've set up a situation around the anti-Semitism stuff where nobody actually can do what it seems the government wants to be the right thing, because of contradictory guidance that they've given through these executive orders and through the Office of Civil Rights, right? They're banning all DEI work, although they haven't defined exactly what that is. But that means any work that is actually focused on a particular group of people based on their identity. And then on the other hand, saying that, but we require you to do all of these different things around anti-Semitism, but we're not actually going to tell you what they are.
Right. They're illegal, but you have to do them.
We're going to penalize you if you don't do them. Right. So it's creating chaos. It's creating contradictory demands, and it makes compliance almost impossible. But it's really important to do what the dean of Georgetown Law School did, which is to point out the fact that they're trying to implement an illegal framework that is impossible and is fundamentally against the First Amendment and the Constitution.
Yeah, I read that document. I don't think these guys ever have. Well, Hadar, it was a pleasure to meet you and to have this conversation. I look forward to our next one where we can look at that litany of junk that I talked at the beginning and say, yeah, you know what? They've walked it all back.
We might have a few conversations before we can say that they've knocked all of it back. But, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me.
And Penn is a great organization, and they're lucky. It's a great place to work, and they're lucky to have you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me.
Bye. Bye. All right, everybody, we are going to take a break, get some news, and when we come back, the interview with Ezra Levin that I promised earlier.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Ezra Levin is not sitting on his hands. He is not waiting for the Trump administration to ruin everything we love so that voters will turn out for Democrats. Nope. Nor is he patient with those who fail to understand that in a democracy, even one as threatened and as challenged as ours, everyone has agency. Everyone can make a difference. He is also, of course, the co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible, a movement that has spread across the country and is now one of the biggest pro-democracy movements, ever. Ezra, welcome back.
Hey, great to be here again. Always nice to have a conversation with you.
So you and Leah, your wife and partner at Indivisible, now host weekly webinars. I was on one of them, and I just want to thank you for doing them. How are they going?
Oh, God, I love it. I got to say, I really love it. And we recently figured out these are mainly Q&As. This is chats with the movement, and we try to make them authentic and real and dig into how do we build up a pro-democracy movement in this country? How do we deal with messaging issues, tactical issues, strategic issues? How do we organize with people we don't 100% agree with on everything, but agree that this is a crisis? It started, we started these last year. We had maybe 300 people join, and it was a friendly conversation among the tip of the spear, the people who are leading groups on the ground. And gosh, we had about 10,000 people register for the last one. And so it's become actually kind of a complicated system of how do you take in questions from thousands and thousands of people? But we instituted a new system where you can just vote. People submit questions. You vote in real time on what are you most interested in? And then we just go through and we have discussions. And I thought it was a frank and wide-ranging conversation. Some of it was questions about, why are we pushing for this or not pushing for that? How do we deal with Democrats who aren't fighting back as hard? How do we force Republicans who aren't showing up to actually face their constituents? It's the real stuff. This is what it looks like to actually build and wield power. And I love it. It's something I look forward to every single week. And the way they start is people introduce, hey, I'm coming in from Tallahassee. I'm coming in from New York. I'm coming in from Washington. And so you get this sense of this nationwide movement building up. I can't get enough of it.
I think it's fabulous. And you said some of the questions are like, what were the top most interesting questions? Maybe we ought to cover them here.
Yeah, well, so right up at the top, this is coming out of the address to Congress that Trump gave, and there was, I think you would say, a disappointing Democratic response, and folks were upset that not only was Al Green one of few that was thrown out or walked out. There were folks like Maxwell Frost and Jasmine Crockett who walked out, but seemingly looked like a normal affair, more or less, with Republicans cheering and Democrats politely sitting in their chairs. Al Green, who was thrown out, was then censured by the Republicans the next day. But it wasn't just the Republicans. There were 10 Democrats who joined to censure him for making a fuss. And so reasonably, a lot of people on the call were incensed. They were thrilled that Al Green actually stood up. They wanted to see all Democrats stand up with him in solidarity. And not only did they not do that, many of them were siding with Republicans. And reports came out that Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the Democrats in the House, was organizing behind the scenes to actively dissuade people from making any scene. And for those who did indeed walk out, they were called into the principal's office and given a talking to. There could not be more distance between the grassroots right now and leadership. And that's not where I want to be. I want to be clear. I want a unified opposition movement. And I think the way that we get there is by demystifying for people what is going through their heads right now. Why aren't Dems doing what we want them to be doing? Why are some leaning forward as far as they are, and how can we support them? So a lot of the top questions, we're wrestling with that basic conundrum we're facing. We're not in this to yell at Dems. That's not my goal. My goal is to fight back the fascists who are tearing down our constitutional republic. But we can't do that without a unified opposition party. So I think people are reasonably grappling with that basic. Yeah, they're frustrated and they want to do good. right? They want to have impact. We don't want to just have the right opinions and yell at people who don't have the right opinions. We want to build power and change things. And so when something bizarre or seemingly bizarre and inexplicable happens on the national stage, people are trying to understand what's going on. And we view our role partly as former congressional staff and as a national operation, trying to demystify that and tell people, okay, here's what they're thinking and here's what you can actually do about it. If we all do this, this is how we move towards our shared goal of having a unified opposition party.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the right form of protest in a situation like that where Trump is speaking in a joint session. I'm not sure what the right form of protest is, but I'm quite confident that even if the right form of protest isn't to stand up and disrupt it, it's certainly not a good idea to be voting with Republicans on a censure bill. That makes no sense to me. You know, and to just go the other direction, I thought Alyssa Slotkin was great. I know a lot of people didn't, but like there are a lot of ways to show opposition here. And as you said, we have to have a big tent about how we do it.
Oh, 1,000%. Look, this is not going to be solved by purely activists or purely folks on the left or purely people who voted for Kamala Harris. We need a pro-democracy movement that spans the ideological spectrum, that includes lefties, that includes moderates, includes non-voters, includes Trump voters who are pissed off right now because they're not getting lower prices of bread. They're getting Project 2025 and all the terrible things that entails. So I strongly agree with that. My favorite thing that Slotkin said, I wasn't wild about everything Slotkin said. My favorite thing that she said, though, was organize locally and hold us accountable, including me. I think that's the right message. If you are looking at national leaders and saying, why aren't they doing something? I think that's a reasonable question. But the follow-up question should be, well, what are you doing? How are you organizing? Because it's on all of us to do this work.
Yeah. I mean, Ezra, I think there's a majority in America and that neither the Democrats or the Republicans have had it in ages. The country's been split because the nature of our politics is like micro-targeting and divide. But I actually think there's a majority to be cobbled together somewhere in America, a real governing majority. And maybe it is exactly the one that you're building around democracy.
Well, when we talk to our groups on the ground, and these are not hardened politicos who have been in this work. I mean, these are nurses and teachers and IT technicians. And the number one issue that they are concerned about, although they care about immigration and climate and taxes and education, the number one issue has consistently been democracy itself, a fear that democracy is under threat. Look, our top legislative priority when we briefly had that Democratic trifecta from 2021 to 2022 was passing a democracy bill that would eliminate gerrymandering, that would get money out of politics, that would make voting day a national holiday, that would make it easier for constituents to make their voice heard and make it harder for money to control everything that happens in politics. And it was a campaign that we
not close enough.
Exactly. It came close, not close enough. Manchin and Sinema, two former Democrats, two former senators, neither Democrats nor senators anymore. They killed it. And so we just weren't able to get it done. But that was a wildly popular piece of legislation. Like that wasn't a 51% piece of legislation. If you ask Americans, should we end gerrymandering? You'll get 60, 70, 80% saying, oh, hell yeah, of course we should. What are you talking about? And that's Democrats, Republicans, and independents.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Ohio, where the citizens voted to end it on, on a ballot to change their constitution. Now, the Ohio legislature ignored them, which is a different question. But hey, look, we're seeing a president and administration, a political party in the Republicans shred the Constitution, walk away from the rule of law, switch sides in a war where our nation previously stood for democracy against aggression, dismantle large parts of the government that are actually doing what they're supposed to do, and through it all making decisions that look like they're just profiting a handful of billionaire oligarchs. That wasn't hard for me to say. Why is that so hard for elected Democrats to say?
Yeah, tell me what you really think.
Right? Well, what I really think is, by the way, we'll come back to this question, but what I really think is this tariff nonsense is market manipulation and people are making money out of it because it sure isn't a policy if you put them on one day and you take them off the next.
Oh, yeah. Well, Look, I see some people saying something like that. I see that in the House and the Senate. Like I said, leaders like Greg Casar or Maxwell Frost or Jasmine Crockett or Chris Murphy on the Senate side, I think he's doing a pretty darn good job describing the crisis that we're in. So I wouldn't paint with totally like broad brushstrokes here. There are leaders here. And if we're happy with what somebody is saying in Congress or elsewhere, we should be supporting them with our attention, with our subscriptions, with our contributions, and with our supportive actions on the ground. We need heroes in this fight. We really do. And the more that people in other positions of power see those folks getting attention and getting praise, the more likely they are to come over. It is both carrots and sticks. It's carrots and sticks. So when folks do good things worth celebrating, we ought to celebrate them to show that we're not just here to criticize, but we've also got to be willing to call out our friends and sometimes allies in the Democratic Party when they're falling flat. They need to know that when they're not meeting the bar, there are going to be political and communications and messaging consequences for that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, while you were talking, I was thinking it isn't just the people when they do right we need to celebrate. I think, and this is, I think, post-Watergate journalism. Americans have not celebrated our government when it does right. And we're now finding out, having built 30 years of skepticism, about 40 years of skepticism about what our government is and what it does. Now that it's falling apart, we're finally going, oh my gosh, they really do a lot of good things. We should celebrate those too.
My background is in anti-poverty policy and advocacy. I started working on homelessness issues and during the height of as the housing crisis got really bad in 2006, 2007, 2008, and then worked on poverty policy in Washington, D.C., both as an advocate and for a staffer for a member of Congress. And one of the real challenges for somebody trying to, increase support or increase the efficacy of government programs or expand them in ways is this concept of the submerged state. Are you familiar with this? This idea that government does so much and it happens largely behind the scenes that many of the beneficiaries of government programs don't recognize that they're benefiting from government programs. I remember the sign, get your government hands off my Medicare. The concern when the Affordable Care Act was being threatened back in 2017, 2018 with folks in red states saying, hey, don't come after my state exchange. Just get rid of Obamacare. Well, your state exchange is Obamacare. That's what that is. And then forget about the folks making sure that nuclear waste is disposed of properly. Forget about people making sure that the planes stay up in the air. These are all things that we just largely take for granted. And unfortunately, it's one of those things where people might not miss it until it's gone, but then they're really going to miss it. And what we need to do in this moment is identify who is to blame for this thing that this terrible condition that we are facing now. Excuse me, my 2-year-old has a cold and now I have a cold. Who is to blame for planes falling out of the sky? Who is to blame for you not getting your Social Security check on time? Who is to blame for your Head Start program being closed? There is somebody who controls the House, the Senate, and the presidency and much of the judicial system.
Yeah,
we need to identify them. Yeah, indeed. I think Elon is a weak link in the chain, and it's a good way to fracture the MAGA coalition because even members of that coalition are concerned about Elon's unpopularity. But I believe we still have a representative democracy in this country. Until proven otherwise, I believe we still have that, which means we need to identify who is fighting for you and who is fighting for the billionaires.
Right. And at the moment, it's a partisan issue. But I think there are some cracks, and we need to lean heavily on them. And you're absolutely right. I love Shakespeare, but I think in Hamlet he was wrong. He said conscience doth make cowards of us all, but it turns out it's politics that makes the cowards. And it's up to individuals to restore some backbone.
There's a form of cowardice and fear that I really appreciate in politics, though. Maybe I'll back into this. Every elected official in this country that I've ever met or ever seen operate wakes up every morning thinking one thing: how am I going to get reelected? that is a healthy fear. That means that you've got some sort of representative democracy where folks have to turn back to their voters and request power for a bit more time. That basic cowardice is healthy. You want to be scared of your constituents. If you're not scared of your constituents, you're not living in a democracy. You're not working in democracy. You can get people to have courage. You've got to organize to get them to have courage. You got to show them that having courage is actually politically advantageous. But you don't just berate them and say, oh, woe is us. We have flawed leaders. They are corrupt. They'll never do the right thing. You might feel good about yourself saying that, but you're not going to achieve any change. You got to recognize that elected officials are human beings that respond to external stimuli like anything else in this world. Are they going to be responding to you? Or are they going to be responding to lobbyists or corporations or the so-called messaging experts inside the DC Beltway? I would rather them respond to you, but they're not going to respond to you individually. They don't care about you individually. Individuals in this country, unless you're rich or super famous, you have very little power. But groups of individuals, those folks have power. If you organize a group of folks, you can actually move these elected officials.
Yeah, Ezra, I'm thinking, as you said that, electeds are thinking about how do I win the next election? And in so many parts of the country, courtesy of John Roberts and the Rucho decision on gerrymandering, one of the answers that politicians make to that question is, I can get reelected if I can pick my voters. Right? I don't have to worry about serving them if I can pick them. And not John Roberts this time, Mike Johnson, I don't think he's ever run in a competitive election. He's never really had to fight for votes. He really doesn't know what this experience of democracy is because he was handpicked in a gerrymandered district. So he really, he had no competition in his primary, and then nobody ran against him.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, I wrote a whole book with several chapters on this basic feature of the modern Republican Party. I'm from Texas. There's a reason why in Texas, the same year that they banned abortion, instituted one of the most egregious abortion bans in the country, they also gutted voting rights. They knew it was a deeply unpopular position, even in Texas. And their solution for this conundrum, how do you maintain an extremist policy agenda in a democracy? How do you do that? Because eventually the voters are going to vote you out, right? Well, there's a simple solution to that. Make it harder for people to vote. Don't give them a voice. I mean, you have two options. You either moderate or you make it more difficult for voters who don't like you to express their opinions.
Yeah, I teach a class in some of this stuff. And one of the questions I ask my students is, when does the sort of garden variety corruption, the kind that gets aldermen thrown into jail here in Chicago, when does that turn into a threat to democracy? And, you sort of get there when the corruption part figures out that you can corrupt the whole system rather than just to get a parking permit or something.
Look, I mean, democracy is not a binary state. It's a spectrum. We can become more or less democratic, and we do that through vigilance or acquiescence, depending on which side of it you're on. Yeah. Nothing about the democracy we have now should be taken for granted or believed to be just the inevitable outcome of a lot of white guys getting together in the late 1700s. I mean, we have been fighting for a more democratic system and making gains and experiencing losses for the last 250 years. That's been the reality of American democracy.
Yep. Well, and we've never made gains without the population fighting for them. I mean, never. I think of the movements that literally, right? I mean, the labor movement,
literally never.
Never.
Never. Give me an example of people in power in an anti-democratic fashion waking up one morning saying, you know what, let's give the people more say. It just feels good on this Tuesday. Let's give the people more say. No, that never happens. The people demand it, and you get a little bit more democratic. That's how it always works.
Every time. Yep. And it doesn't happen quickly. I mean, I think of the 87 years between Seneca Falls and women getting to vote, or the 100 years between those great amendments after the Civil War and the Civil Rights Act that actually, gave people the vote. It takes a long time, but it takes concerted effort.
Look, I mean, the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65, those first came together in the late 1800s when, at the time, Republican senators were seeing Southern segregationists deny black populations the right to vote. And they thought, well, we got to do something about that. And the Southern segregationists did not like that. And so they started using the filibuster. They weaponized the filibuster to block any kind of civil rights or voting rights legislation, even anti-lynching legislation for decades. Often these fights take a long time, but the only way you achieve change is by organizing on the ground. These aren't one-off marches. That's not what's going to change anything. It's persistent organizing, building up structures of people power to contend with concentrated wealth and concentrated political power that opposes any change.
Right. And we are definitely in that moment of concentrated wealth and concentrated political power.
Indeed.
I'm going to, we are, just so the folks who are listening know, we're recording this Friday. You're going to hear it Saturday. And later today, I'm going with my son. We're going to a March for Science, rally later today with lots of people from Chicago's a big university town. The attacks are huge. And, the weather's not so great here yet. I just think that this summer is going to be a summer like we haven't seen in 50 years, with lots of protest everywhere.
Well, we're not waiting for the summer. I'll put on your calendar April 5th, 4/5/25. There's going to be a massive show of force of folks who are opposing Musk and Trump and cowardly Republicans who are hiding from them all over the country. I would expect for it to be the first really big showing all across the country. It's not just Indivisible. Indivisible will be doing it, but also folks like Working Families Party and Move On and the unions and other community groups around the country. It's going to be big, so I would start planning to show up.
All right. I'm going to learn more about that before we air tomorrow, so I can tell people more about it. And it's going to be all over the country, right?
It will be all over the country. Then this is early. We don't have. There's no website out there. This is growing with virality right now. It's spreading across the ecosystem. 5051, which is a beautiful organic movement of folks who have been putting together protests around the country, organized on Reddit without any kind of infrastructure. It's just people are angry and organizing. They're part of it as well. I expect people to show up in a big way and say no to this takeover. No kings. No to the billionaires who are trying to undermine our constitutional republic, and focusing in on not just the policy issues in front of us. Look, I want to fight for Medicaid. I want to fight for Social Security. I want to fight for a budget that actually reflects the will of the people. But this is bigger than a typical political fight around policy. This isn't just a 1990s era, Republicans want to cut services and Democrats want to raise taxes on the wealthy. It's more than that. It's, do we have a constitutional republic or don't we?
Will we ever have a policy fight again?
Indeed. I would love to disagree with somebody like Liz Cheney on social policy or tax policy or education policy. That would be my dream, for us to be on the opposite sides of a political fight, where we can just understand we have a republic. That is our system of government, and now let's debate the policies. That's not the fight of the day. That is not the defining fight of 2025. The defining fight of 2025 are we an authoritarian government or are we a constitutional republic?
Yeah, I don't understand how it is that there are people who still just think it's normal times. I don't. And maybe it's this shock and awe stuff where there's just so much coming at us we can't tell. I've stopped talking on this show about the one-off things that the administration does, and instead I put everything into the categories that scholars recognize are the signs of strong democracies, or the ones that get undermined in Hungary, and just say, okay, here's one more thing they did to weaken a free press. Here's one more thing they did to undermine NGOs. Here's one more thing they did to weaken voting, rather than just like talk about each one itself, because that's just confusing to folks.
Mm. Yeah, I think we need a simple message. We really need a simple message, and that message needs to encompass not just folks on one part of the ideological spectrum. It's got to be broad. It's got to be unifying. I want to wrap ourselves in the American flag. I want to have I want to say the Pledge of Allegiance. I want to emphasize that what we are doing is the same thing that the Union was doing in 61 and 62 and 63 and 64 and 65 in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. What we are standing up for is the United States of America against an aggressive authoritarian force. And we're going to win because there are more of us than there are of them.
Yeah, this winter was, to use this same metaphor, but to go back a little further, this winter was our Valley Forge. Are we, the enemies of this fledgling democracy are in full power, and they've occupied New York at the time. They've occupied lots of important places. And, this ragtag group is trying not to freeze to death, but to be ready to fight.
Yeah, we need folks who are ready to fight, and I will emphasize the best way to fight in a moment like this is through effective, broad-based, nonviolent resistance and opposition. That is how you build a majority movement against a creeping authoritarianism.
So let's go back to where we began, because building that movement means supporting the people who are doing it, and again, we had this notion in Congress where our congressional leaders object if we protest impolitely, and I don't know what's in their heads. Can you help? Have you talked to them? Can you understand what that's about?
Yeah, and look, I think it's really important for us to understand the positions of folks who we disagree with strategically, because it doesn't do any of us any good to flatten and say, well, they're compromised and they're bad. They're in the bad category. Because
I don't think they are. I just don't understand them.
Well, some of them might be bad, but it doesn't help you to then organize and bring them over to your side if that's your goal. Because like I said, my goal is not to have the right opinion. My goal is not to righteously raise my fist in feckless fashion and then go home and feel good about myself. My goal is to have a unified pro-democracy opposition movement in the country. And so then you got to recognize there are some people who either disagree about the conditions on the ground, or they disagree about the right strategic play to make, even if they agree about the conditions on the ground. Now, for folks who don't think this is a crisis, I would point to many of the things you've already said, and I won't rehash it. But let's focus on this question of folks who maybe agree that it's a crisis. We'll say it's a crisis, but we'll then berate folks who do something like what Al Green did, or what some members did, protesting this speech to Congress that Trump gave this week. Here is their strategic analysis as best I can say, and I won't create a straw man. I'll try to give it straight. Their belief goes something like this: yes, this is a crisis, but Trump is relatively popular right now. And because Trump is popular, it would be ill-advised to take him on directly. He is doing unpopular things, and in due time, the public will come to see how unpopular and bad these things are. They will turn on Trump naturally without us getting in the way. And when he is sufficiently unpopular, that's when we can start to attack. That's when we can actually start to organize against him. And then the public will be on our side already. I think that's a fair representation without too much bias there. Obviously, I disagree. And I think I disagree in a key way. I think Democrats in particular have a problem with looking at a simple poll and saying, oh, the people are there. I should stand there with where the people are. Republicans look at a poll and say, oh, the people aren't there yet. I've got to get them there. We're gonna get the people to adopt this position. This is X issue. Trans kids in sports is going to be the most important issue in the country. We're going to make sure everybody believes that. Nobody 5 years ago thought that was the most important issue in the country. And yet Republicans, man, they hammered on it. They push it, and they make it a hot topic of conversation just about every day now. I think public opinion is not like the weather. It doesn't just come and go. It's not immutable either. It doesn't just exist and is unchangeable. It is actually the product of normal everyday people looking around and trying to see, where is everybody else? Where are my neighbors? Where's my community? Where's the media? Where are my elected officials? Are they saying it's a crisis? Because if they're not saying a crisis, it's probably going to take me longer to come over to the position that it's a crisis. So I think what you would call bringing public opinion over to your side, I think you'd call that political leadership. And it kind of sucks because you have to take a chance. You have to say something that isn't in the moment deeply popular automatically, but will become it if enough people act in that way. And so I think the reason for the strategic disagreement is it's not easy to do that. It's not automatic to do that. There will be some pushback and there is some risk involved. But if you don't want to lead, if you don't want to take on that risk, I don't think you should be occupying that position of leadership.
Yeah.
That I think is the key strategic difference. And so why you see some folks behaving in that way, I don't actually think it's necessarily that they are bad or they're corrupt in some way. It's not that. There's a legitimate strategic difference. And then how do we work through that? We've got to demonstrate that the people are demanding leadership. We've got to organize so well across so many geographies and so many constituencies that the folks in leadership positions say, oh my gosh, we've got to do something. They are going to come after us if we don't do something. So we've got to start leading.
And look, the people in politics must notice. I mean, my governor in Illinois has spoken out. He has decided it's okay to take this guy on. And he hasn't done it a lot, but every time he has, people are talking about it. He's getting a lot of praise for it. That kind of thing matters to people in politics.
Look, you don't get involved in politics if you like to be booed. You get involved. You run for office because you like to talk to crowds and be cheered. Of course it matters. Think these are human beings who decided to devote their life to giving speeches and to talking to people. They want love. They're looking for support. Give it to them when they do the right thing.
Yep. All right. So just tell everybody again how they get involved, and then you can get healthy again and get back out there. And I'll go to this rally.
Apologies for my voice. Number one thing, do not just consume media in this moment. It's good that you're learning and listening to this, but I have a real bias towards action. You are not going to solve this problem that we're all facing by doom scrolling or watching or listening to the news. You can get educated from that, but you got to then take the next step and take action. And the single best action that you can take in this moment is to find a community of folks geographically near you, in your community, that are goals aligned, that also agree this is a crisis and also would like to do something. Now, what that something is, it could be mutual aid in support of trans kids under attacks or refugees or immigrants who are being threatened. It could be organizing to get somebody better in office. It could be organizing to push an elected official, or a Republican or a Democrat. Your leverage and your power is going to be different depending on where you are and what your political geography looks like. Those opportunities are going to be different in Arkansas than they are in New York City, than they are in Austin, Texas. So you're going to have to use your brain, pay attention, identify where the opportunities are. You're going to do that best with a group of other people. Now, that's what Indivisible does. There are 1,500 local Indivisible groups all around the country that are run by volunteers like you who decided, I guess today's the day I got to do something. But if Indivisible doesn't scratch the itch for you, that's fine. Find the community that does. Find the thing that will get you to show up every week with a group of people and organize. And from that, the sky's the limit.
That is a great way to end. Thank you, as always, Ezra, for joining us on this show and sharing what you do, but also for Indivisible and this impactful and important leadership in this moment.
Of course. No, happy to talk anytime. Look, it is important that all of us make clear that the folks who are attacking our democracy, are not all powerful. They do not hold all the cards. If we organize, we do indeed have more power than them. And people are going to learn about that if we're talking about it. So I'm happy to talk anytime.
Great. Thank you so much.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
All right, Jim, get us going.
Hi, Edwin. The schizophrenic approach to our politics is, you name the adjective. But think of this. people with nothing to do go to a library and monitor what's in the literature in the library. Then they go to our schools and monitor our curriculum. Then they go to the universities and monitor those. And then they give us their definition of science. And they give us the definition of medicine, their definition of the Constitution, and then their definition of history. Now, when I was raised, our big thing was altruism. We thought that politicians should be altruistic, inevitably. And this group is anything but. You know what they're doing. They're just destroying the poor around the world. Around the world, they're taking away important vaccinations and help for whatever the case may be, help Homo sapiens around the world. And then taking axe to us in the United States. My point being schizophrenic, what happens, or say we sweep the board, Democrats take over and sweep the board. We try to reinstate, because I contend that Social Security, Medicare, those aren't Marxist ideas. Those are altruistic ideas, ultimately. And once we do sweep the board, what happens? And then we still have these bad actors who think that they have an interpretation of what history should be in the United States. How long can we go on like that, Edwin? That's my point.
Are you really asking me what I would do if we took it over? Because I have an answer, but it's not the one anybody's ready for. You know, the 14th Amendment still stands, notwithstanding what the Supreme Court did. I would use the window that they gave and have Congress have a vote and vote that the people who supported the overthrow of the government violated their right to serve in the government. I would throw every one of them out. And while they're not there, I would pass the voting rights legislation. I would pass legislation to control money in politics. I would do all, those great, they had to be thrown out after the Civil War in order to pass the legislation that we passed then too. You're absolutely right. They'll never help us.
No, but you're exactly right. But our the law has to stand tall in this ordeal. I mean, look what he's exhausting the courts at the moment. And think of the money that ICE is putting people out of the country. You could give those people a condo for the dough that they're spending to put them in chains and sending them all around the world. I mean, look at this realistically. And yeah, when you got great callers, you have a great week. Thanks, Edwin.
Always a pleasure to talk, and thanks for kicking us off. Let's head to Seattle. Paul?
Hey, Edwin, how are you?
Thank you. I'm okay.
I disagree with three of your guests this afternoon that Democrats, I guess they don't think Democrats should have protested at the joint address. Your last guest, he could go up against Trump. I'm sorry. No. What fell flat with Al Green is that apparently nobody knew that he was going to do what he did, and so it didn't have any. There was no organ. Again, it's like who was it? Roy Rogers said, "I don't belong to any organized political party. I'm a Democrat." There was no organization, and they were just kind of surprised at what nobody knows what to do. Let me put it this way: a good friend of mine, a lifelong friend of mine, a mentor of mine, who was a psychiatrist, said. He's passed away now, but he told me this is what happened in court because he was at a lot of assignments of court evaluations. He said, who wins in court is the party who brings the most drama. And Donald Trump, as crooked as he is, what he brings is, in his chaos, is drama. And the Democrats are just too wonky. There's no drama in anything they do. There's no drama. So this sort of, I don't know, we got to get highly organized. And that's not what the Republicans are doing. How come they win an election, but they're not highly organized? I mean, they harp on things. They make things up to create drama, like transgender people in sports. When I was living in Michigan, when I was taking care of my mom, my senator in the state Senate was put a bill before the legislature to ban kids from participating in transgender kids from participating in school sports. The Detroit Free Press said that there were 10 transgender minors in the state of Michigan, and none of them wanted to play school sports. That's the kind of crap they do, right? In other words, they make an issue out of what's not an issue. CRT, critical race theory, Antifa. They just make this crap up. They just dig it up and make it an issue. And that's what gets people's attention.
Well, look, I think the key thing here is that you can actually make an issue. You can make an issue out of almost nothing, right? So if they're making issues out of nothing, the question is, can we make an issue out of something? In fact, can we make an issue out of the most important thing? And I think we can. They want to say whatever they want to say. They'll make up, because if trans doesn't work, they'll have something else. They will make up some thing to be incredibly outraged about and say that we are putting their children in jeopardy. It's all a lie. They are putting our children in jeopardy. They are destroying our schools. They are tearing away their future. And that is a conversation that I welcome. Bring it on, and then let's talk about it. And I, you know what? If our elected officials want to say, "Oh no, I'm going to Congress in order to protect, this program or that program," we should primary them, right? They got to be able to protect everything, the big question, not like something tiny, no matter how important that tiny thing is.
Yeah. Let me ask you real quickly. When Donald Trump says at the joint address that we're going to get Greenland one way or another, and he says that, this is so inappropriate. He's made the remark before, we're going to take Greenland. But when you make that at a joint session of Congress and you talk about it and say, we're going to get it one way or another, don't tell me, first of all, that's very serious. But I guarantee you that Russia has something to do with this. And if I haven't said it to you already, my prediction is that what he means is Russia is going to invade Greenland, and Donald Trump in the United States will do nothing to stop them. And then it will take about 20 minutes for Russia to do that. And because there's nothing standing between occupying Greenland and except for the United States. And then Russia will have a base and an outpost in the Western Hemisphere. I think Putin wants that because he regrets that Russia sold Alaska to the United States, and Greenland is, frankly, it's 25% larger than Alaska and more valuable. There's no doubt that Putin's behind all this.
Well, I'll watch that closely for sure. That's interesting.
Well, I don't know why he'd be saying this except to create drama. And obviously it's everything. He's very bellicose now. He wants to fight with Iran after he pulled out of the new. He's saying, we have a deal that's as good as a military victory, but if they don't want to sign it, he's going to get Mr. Tough Guy. Frankly, I think I would be happy if the entire world turned their back on the United States. I'm happy. I'm happy for that.
Well, I would not be happy. We probably deserve some of that with Trump's behavior, but I would not be happy. It'd be so damaging. I would rather, that they just said, look, if you're coming from a red state, you need a visa to come to France. Yep. Well, Paul, thank you. I'm going to keep going, but I'm going to watch that Greenland stuff. That's interesting. Really interesting. Marty, you're next.
Hi. Hey, Edwin. Happy Saturday. Thanks for taking my call.
You bet.
It kind of feels like we're living in a dystopian, post-apocalyptic reality show, right? Kind of like forced to watch in horror, like strapped to our seats like Alex in A Clockwork Orange, just forced to watch as this, as our democracy kind of just gets slowly, washed away and gutted and compromised. And, I think it's the rise of the autocracy. But I did want to give a shout out to Representative Al Green for telling Trump that he doesn't have a mandate to do this, because he really doesn't. And if you didn't get a chance to check out Amy Goodwin's Friday program, she did a really good interview with him, and it made me respect him a lot. Just how passionate he is about defending his constituents. But I mean, this government, you know, it's amazing the things that they prioritize over their tax cuts, like, you know, gutting the Department of Education, Homeland Security, Department of Energy, USAID, Veterans Affairs. It's just, the list goes on and on. It's mind-boggling just how quickly, you know, all of these agencies can be dismantled. My fear is that we're going to have like a brain drain for these, you know, skilled, dedicated, and specialized scientists and knowledge workers and cybersecurity experts that have dedicated their life to public service and are now, you know, once bitten, twice shy. Why would you go back and dedicate yourself to working for the federal government if you know that you're just an election away from your job being, you know, completely thrown away at a whim? I think what we've done to our federal workforce is abhorrent. I mean, their service, they need to feel that their service is valued, and instead they're being treated like they're disposable, like that they're on some show of some office edition of Survivor Island, you know. Yeah.
This is, you know, Elon Musk, in fairness, and it's hardly gets him off the hook. He treats everybody this way. He treated the private sector employees at Twitter this way too. It is cruel and unfair. And in the government's case, these people are doing a very important service for Americans. They are. This isn't about waste in government. There are ways to attack waste. I know when I was in the Clinton administration, we shrunk the size of government and did it in a way that we worked with the people who knew the government best, the employees, to figure out how to do it. And many of them took retirement on their own. The size of government shrunk, but government got more efficient. And it got more efficient because we respected the people who were there, who knew what they were doing. This is not about what they say it's about. It is not about shrinking the government. It is not about making government more efficient. It's about cruelty and partisanship and trying to entrench power. I disagree with this notion, though, that we are watching the autocracy win. We are watching the autocrats try, but everywhere I go, I see Americans waking up. And you know what?
Oh, I completely.
I mean, if he's afraid of Putin, wait till he sees what happens when America wakes up.
We are waking up. Yes. We are.
And we are a lot tougher than Putin or any of the other people that scare this man. Yeah. Well, listen, Marty, thank you. I don't think you've called before. If you have, it's been a while. Have you?
Here and there. Yeah, I'm going to try to get in when I can.
But it's been a while. So thank you. I appreciate that you're paying attention and part of this community. I really do.
Absolutely. And I write on Substack, too, so it's cool.
Excellent.
So,
go ahead, give it a shout out. What should people look for?
Yeah. Well, Party Marty is right.substack.com if anybody wants to check out. But I just do liberal because I want to reclaim the word right because I'm tired of them having it. So, and anybody can fact check me, but yeah, I write about all this stuff that's going down, and I just try to do my part to get, real information out to people.
Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right, Marty. Dave, we're going to turn to you, and I believe, looking at the clock, you are going to get the last word.
Oh, wow. Hey, Edwin. We need to look first for leadership, for the first 2 years here. Who are we going to get as leaders? Because after this president's speech, we seen that they left that Al Green out to hang, and then one or two of our own sanctioned against them.
Yeah.
I mean, and then like they pointed out, there's some that were in pink, and then others were in black shirts or whatever walking out, and it was like there wasn't even no organization there of being, is unison,
Yep.
Personally, I would have thought that seeing the pedo that Trump and that, I would have had the male senators dress up like President Zelensky with that sweater type thing on.
See, that would have been great. That would have been great.
Yeah, that was my thought. It'd be a giant
That's a great thought. And
because if you recall, right about 4 years ago, when all of the females dressed in white for that, the right to vote that time, they at least had it more together there. So talking about with the veterans and stuff, 30% of them were veterans that are working at the VA that are getting cut. That 80,000 or so, and they've been they're still understaffed. They're understaffed yet, and then he wants to get it back down to what pre-2019 staffing, personnel. And unfortunately, he's hurt.
We sent a generation to war all over the world, and they need services now that they're home. But if he wants to say, you've come home from fighting America's wars overseas, and we don't care about you, that's not okay. That is not okay.
No, and remember about a month ago when he did that executive order to bring, to get these guys that were discharged for not taking the COVID shot or disobeying a lawful order. And he had about 8,200 total got discharged or chose to leave. They were given that option.
Yep.
And right now, when he's saying, come on back, they got only about 650 Marines and Army soldiers and stuff had expressed the interest in coming back. And in other words, about 8% roughly.
Yep.
The good lot of them, they've moved on with their lives, and they don't want to have to go through that enlistment process and procedure again and then required legal and moral standards. That's rich coming from a guy like Trump, a moral standard and physical fitness requirements. And lastly, they'd have to re-up for another 2 years. They don't want it. Apparently they don't want it so far. So I don't know. But talking on that Greenland, don't you think Denmark or somebody would jump in too? Because seeing that they've been kind of
Europe was not interested in America or Russia taking it. But you know what? The world order that we have known is something that Trump is eager to destroy. Because I don't know why. It's been the most peaceful in human history, the most prosperous in human history. Billions of people all over the world have been lifted out of poverty. And while there are wars, there have been fewer and they've been less hideous than in the last century. All of which is because we learned something after the horrible world wars in the last century. But this man wants to go back to that imperial system. Anyway, that's got to be our last word. We're out of time.
Thanks,
Thank
Edwin.
you, as always.
Have a good week. Be well.
All right, you guys, I'll talk to you next week. Look on websites, look on Indivisible's site, find a way to get out there and raise a ruckus. See you next week.